Welcome to the Dublin Bible Talks, midweek Bible talks for workers in Dublin. I'm Cameron Jones. Have you experienced God's mighty works? In our second instalment of the great story of David and Goliath in 1 Samuel 17, we find that God's mighty works look mighty strange. And please consider joining us live on Wednesdays from your workplace, 1 p.m. Dublin Time on Zoom. It's a simple way of identifying as a Christian in your workplace. Simply use the link bit.ly/DublinBibleTalks. That's bit.ly/DublinBibleTalks. How does God show his power? When you think of the mighty acts of God, what examples come to mind? Of course, the God of the Bible is all-powerful, but again and again, he takes us by surprise. And the greatest surprise comes to us in the New Testament, in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 9. That's one of the places it is described perhaps most clearly, where God says, "My power is made perfect in weakness." This is God's astonishing way of working. Through weakness, he overthrows all other powers. He brings down the proud and he shatters the weapons of his enemies. Nowhere is that more shocking or more glorious than in the cross of Christ. God accomplishes his purposes for all creation through the shameful crucifixion of his innocent Son. And this is not some temporary fix or worldly strategy. No, this is the message we Christians carry. Christ crucified, the only way we can be reconciled with our Creator. Dear friends, God does not work the way we do. And because it's so different, the way that he does things, we might start to think that he's not to be trusted. But, dear friends, he is. He is completely trustworthy. And yet, his ways keep surprising us. But that leaves us with a key question. Do you believe it? Or do you still think that the real solutions to life lie elsewhere, in wealth, or in education, or in power, or in progress? Do you maybe sometimes think, or maybe it's not outright thinking it, but maybe does your life just go down the pattern that reveals that you really think this way? Do you think in your mind actually that trusting God might sound fine on Sundays, but what about life in the real world, at work, at home, in moments of crisis? Remember with me where 1 Samuel began. 3,000 years ago, God's people are a nation in crisis. Continually forgetting God is their problem. And the surprising beginning that we encountered at the beginning of 1 Samuel was not found in a palace, but in a little forgotten town with a grieving woman with a barren womb. That's not where anyone expected help to come from. And now we find ourselves in chapter 17. Two great nations, well, one great nation and another one, face off. The Israel and the Philistines, posed for a decisive battle. Out comes Goliath, the giant Philistine, calling across the valley in chapter 17, verse 10. You see it there? "I defy the ranks of Israel this day. Give me a man that we might fight together." A champion's challenge. Winner takes all. Here begins the second part of the story of David and Goliath. And we begin by the narrator taking our eyes away from the battlefield and going back to Bethlehem, to young David in verse 12. We've met him before. He's the one among Jesse's sons who in chapter 16 verse 1 and in 16 verse 12, if you see there, God has chosen to be a king for myself. Now that's a great contrast to Saul, the king the people had asked for, a king for themselves. From the day of David's anointing, the Spirit of God has fallen on him and remained, we saw in chapter 16 verse 13. By that Spirit, he has been able to calm the harmful spirit that was tormenting King Saul. But while the battle lines are drawn up at the valley of Elah, just 12 miles west of Bethlehem, David is nowhere near the fighting. And the way he's introduced in this passage makes us think that what's happening in this story may occur before his service in Saul's court began. What happened in that previous account that we saw was maybe a little bit of a glimpse of what is to come, a hopeful setup of what we are going to encounter. In verse 12 of 1 Samuel 17, we're reminded also of David's family. His father, Jesse, is an Ephrathite. That should, in our memories, take us back to the very beginning of the book, to that certain man who would become Samuel's father. And remember that he also was from that same remote and unimpressive place in Israel. Samuel, with that backwater heritage, however, had been the last to lead Israel into victory over the Philistines. David, we're reminded, is one of 8 sons, and we're told that Jesse is an old man. And what have we learned about the sons of old men so far in 1 Samuel? Do you remember Eli's sons in chapter 2, verse 12? Do you remember Samuel's sons in chapter 8, verse 3? There is a pattern of good men having awful sons. And so, what are the sons of Jesse like? Have a look there. The 3 oldest sons of Jesse have followed Saul to the battle, and the names of his 3 sons who went to battle were Eliab, the firstborn, and next to him Abinadab, and the third Shammah. These are the same 3 that we met in the earlier visit to Bethlehem. Remember how Samuel had looked at Eliab, the eldest son, and thought, surely the Lord's anointed stands before me. Eliab was the kind of man you'd expect to be the kind of guy who would step up to the taunt of a champion. But how do we find Eliab and his brothers in this passage? They have heard Goliath's taunts and are, look at verse 12, dismayed and greatly afraid. Not one of these front-line sons is the one that God has chosen. So in verse 14 we return to looking at David again, the youngest and therefore also the smallest. The 3 big sons are following Saul, the little one back in Bethlehem watching sheep. And now we find out he's running errands, carrying care packages from home to the front line. Now if you knew nothing else about this story, and you saw 3 big soldier sons and 1 little shepherd boy with a delivery bag, which one of those are you looking at to produce a hero? And the people need a hero, because in verse 16 we're told again, for 40 days the Philistine came forward and took his stand morning and evening. In verses 17 to 27, we look at David and the threat of the Philistine. Verse 17, our eyes are taken back to Bethlehem, and it seems that the news about what's happening at the front line hasn't reached Bethlehem yet. Jesse said to David his son, do you see it there? Take for your brothers an ephah of this parched grain and these 10 loaves and carry them quickly to the camp of your brothers. Also, take these 10 cheeses for the commander of their 1,000. See if your brothers are well, and bring some token from them. The job David is given here shows us his place in the family and his place in the nation. He's not a warrior. He's not at the front. He's the youngest, the smallest, the errand boy. In verse 19, Jesse tells him where to go. And Jesse assumes that his older sons are in the thick of battle, fighting with the Philistines. But we know that there's no fighting going on. We know his sons, along with all of Israel, are trembling with terror under the taunts of the Goliath the giant. And yet in verse 20, David sets out, obediently, faithfully, doing a very ordinary task in a very ordinary way, a very ordinary, unimpressive, but obedient son. Friends, is that how you imagine the life of a Spirit-filled, anointed one of God? Quiet obedience, devoted to lowly tasks. But remember the last time, in 1 Samuel, a father sent his son out to do something that seemed mundane. It had been Saul. His father had sent him out to find donkeys that had gotten lost back in chapter 9. Surely we're beginning to learn that unimpressive things, things that we would not count as worth noting, are worth having a look at. It's not the way we expect things to be done, but maybe we should keep looking at such things. In verses 20, the second half of verse 20 to 24, David hears Goliath. Have a look at it there. And he, that's David, came to the encampments as the host was going out to the battle line, shouting the war cry. And Israel and the Philistines drew up for battle, army against army. David turns up just in time for some action. Perhaps as the younger brother, and still just a boy, he thinks he's arrived at just the right time, just the time for some excitement. Verse 22, David leaves the things in the charge of the keeper of the baggage and ran to the ranks and went and greeted his brothers. The keeper of the baggage is an odd little detail there, isn't it? But maybe you'll remember a collection of baggage has featured before in 1 Samuel, back in chapter 10. Back then it was not a boy coming from the baggage, but Saul, the man chosen to be king, who was hiding among the baggage. Well, with that in mind, David runs forward to meet his brothers and speaking with them at the front line. Verse 23, as he talked to them, behold, the champion of the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, came out of the ranks of the Philistines and spoke the same words as before, and David heard them. Now that is a word-for-word repetition of what we know has been happening morning and evening for 40 days. It's not the first time we've heard it. It's not the first time the big brothers have heard it. It's not the first time all of Israel has heard it. But it is the first time this little boy hears it. It's a very simple phrase there, David heard. Did anyone notice that David heard? Did anyone care that David heard? Well, probably not. But that little unimpressive phrase marks a turning point in Israel's history. This little unimpressive phrase marks a turning point in global history. But that's not yet what it looks like to anyone who was there. Verse 24, all the men of Israel, when they saw the man, fled from him and were much afraid. And it's looking like a repeat of the Philistine victory that we saw back in 1 Samuel chapter 13. And just notice the slight difference from verse 11, where it was heard, and where it was heard, and terror was caused by what they heard. Here they see it. It's a little change, but I think it's significant. I think the author is reminding us about how we see things. Something that we learned back in chapter 16, verse 7. Israel here are seeing this man according to their eyes. But as God's people, shouldn't they be seeing him as the Lord sees? He is a terrifying human being. But friends, what does he look like from the perspective of the creator of the universe? Well, David has just heard this for the first time. But Saul's been there from the start, hasn't he? What's the asked-for king? The man who is head and shoulders taller than anyone else in Israel. What has he done in response to this Philistine threat? We don't get to hear it from Saul himself, but from the hearsay, from the gossip of the troops at the front line. Verse 25. And the men of Israel said, "Have you seen this man who's come up? Surely he has come up to defy Israel. And the king will enrich the man who kills him with great riches, and give him his daughter, and make his father's house free in Israel." Now that might be the product of the rumour mill in the army. In Australia, we'd call it a furphy, a word that was used because the company that made the water barrels for the troops in the First World War was a company called furphies. And that's where the men would gather and gossip around the water cooler. Much the same happens in businesses all around the world today, the gossip around the water cooler. But whether it's just a rumour or whether it's real, it's clear that there isn't any decisive action being put forward by Saul, the king the people had asked for. In verse 26 we see, "And David said to the men who stood by him, What shall be done with the man who kills this Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine, that he should defy the armies of the living God?" Friends, those words are the very first words we hear from David's mouth in the Bible. And what he wants is the rumour to be clarified. And what is also revealed is that he very clearly sees this Philistine differently. He's sounding quite a lot like Saul's son, Jonathan, back in chapter 14, verse 6, where Jonathan had said, "Come, let us go over to the garrisons of these uncircumcised." This little boy, this young boy, he's not shattered by the Philistines' mockery, but he speaks of taking the mockery away. He seems to see this situation in a way that no one else in Israel's army is seeing. The word uncircumcised here, it might be strange to our years, but we need to have in mind that that was the symbol that this giant was not one of God's people. This giant who is taunting here is a worshipper of false gods, of dead gods. Remember just a couple of chapters ago, that stone statue of the Philistine god Dagon, fallen face down and broken before the Ark of the Covenant of the living God. That happened back in 1 Samuel chapter 5. Doesn't anyone see how foolish it is to be afraid of someone who worships dead gods when they themselves know the living God? The Spirit of God that fell upon David and remained, it hasn't changed his size, has it? It hasn't changed his age, has it? There's nothing anyone could see by looking at him that would make us think that the Spirit of God is on this one, except that he seems to be able to see things differently. He seems to be seeing as the Lord sees. In verse 27, David gets an answer to the first part of his question, but no one responds to his different way of seeing the Philistine. His brothers respond, however, in verses 28 to 30. And big, impressive Eliab, the one who looks to the human eye to be the kind of bloke who might take a stand against a giant, he takes a lead and does the talking. Verse 28, Eliab, the eldest brother, heard when he spoke to the men. And Eliab's anger was kindled against David, and he said, "Why have you come down? And with whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know your presumption and the evil of your heart, for you have come down to see the battle." See, David's brothers were there when David was anointed, but they might not have understood what was going on. But such a response of the older brothers to the younger brother, maybe that should remind us of the jealousy that Joseph's brothers had all the way back in Genesis chapter 37 of their younger brother, who seemed to be speaking beyond his age and his status. But actually, as we're reading this, friends, we can see that this is more than just sibling rivalry. No, this is an issue of God's chosen and anointed king. And the one who sets himself against God's king is setting themselves up against God himself. Eliab doesn't realize it. But what he has said has just put himself on Goliath's side. It's even in the way that Eliab phrases his question. "Why have you come down?" he says. It sounds quite a lot like an echo of Goliath's question in verse 8. And the tone is certainly the same. What he's doing here is attributing evil to David's heart, when we know that David has been chosen according to God's heart. Eliab, the older brother, is seeing only as man sees. David responds in verse 29, "What have I done now?" But it was not a word. And he turned away from him and toward another and spoke in the same way, and the people answered him again as before. Now, if I were one of the elder brothers, or one of the other soldiers that heard David as he moved from group to group repeating these questions, I think I would have been getting increasingly annoyed. Who does this little boy think he is? He doesn't know what he's talking about. Does this little pipsqueak think that he's better than us? And friends, I think if it was me, I would have been even more annoyed the more that David went on, because a little bit of me would have realised that what he's saying sounds a little bit too much like what I should be thinking. Oh, but come on now. It's one thing to think that when you're at home reading the Bible around the family dinner table. It's another thing when you're out here on the battlefield and some monster of a man is challenging you to fight. It's one thing to be saying that at church when you're among other Christians and you're singing the songs, but it's another thing when you're in the workplace and people can be openly hostile to what you actually believe. And saying what you believe might actually have consequences in the real world. But as we see little David asking his uncomfortable questions, it's good to be seeing with those kind of eyes. See, the account is clear that not one Israelite in the whole valley of Elah had any hope that there would be a successful response to the taunts of this giant Goliath. And to suggest that this little boy would be in any way an answer to such a literally massive threat to the existence of the nation seems absolutely ludicrous. But then God does not do things the way we expect. And surely at this stage of 1 Samuel, we should be beginning to learn this. It's a pattern that continues. It continues for another 1,000 years of Israel's history, recorded and preserved for us in the Bible. As we follow David's line, we end up coming to one whose words, like David's before his brothers, were met with scorn and met with hostility. Those of this descendant of David, when he came to his hometown, the people who knew him best heard what this son of David had to say, and this is how they responded. We have it recorded in Mark chapter 6, verse 3. They said, "Is this not the carpenter, the son of Mary, and the brother of James and Joseph and Judas and Simon? And are not his sisters here with us?" And they took offence at him. Even his own family in Mark chapter 3, verse 20. Then he went home, and the crowd gathered again so that he could not even eat. And when his family heard of it, they went out to seize him, for they were saying, "He's out of his mind." And maybe if you had grown up and lived in that same village, you might have made that very same mistake. But it is still a very great mistake. A teacher using strange stories, a healer rejected by his own people, executed in disgrace under foreign rule, the whole world united against him, weak and pathetic and humiliated on a cross. This is the King of Glory. It sounds as unlikely as a boy from Bethlehem standing in front of a giant with 5 stones and a sling. And yet here is God's power made perfect in weakness. This little boy walking around the camp asking awkward questions. Ah, yes, friends, here is God's power made perfect in weakness. And so, friends, as you return to your meetings, as you return to your deadlines, as you return to your colleagues, as you return to your conversations, remember where true power lies. It is not in success, it is not in image, it is not in control, it is not in wealth, it is not in winning the deal. It is in Christ crucified. Christ, the power of God and the wisdom of God. And so, friends, do not be afraid to speak of him. Even if it sounds weak, and even when it sounds foolish, and even if it seems out of place. For this message, friends, is the message by which God saves. Thank you for listening to the recording of the Dublin Bible Talks. You can join us in real time on Wednesdays at 1 p.m. Dublin Time on Zoom, bit.ly/DublinBibleTalks. That's bit.ly/DublinBibleTalks.